Welcome to the fourth session of our study of Martin Luther. In our last session, we learned about Martin Luther's wrestling with the concept of the righteousness of God. Ultimately, he realized that the righteousness of God was not a goal, but a gift freely given through Jesus Christ. This week, we will learn how this foundation of righteousness led Martin Luther to publish the 95 Theses, which caused an explosion of change in both the religious and political realms of 16th century Europe. Let's begin.
I am Dan Draper, and I'm presenting the fourth session on Martin Luther, an explosion of change. I'd like to share some insights on what was going on at the time Martin Luther wrote and posted his 95 Theses. As we learned in previous sessions, social, political, and religious cultures were very different from what they are today. To understand Martin Luther's reasons for composing the 95 Theses, you need to understand what indulgences were. Then you need to know how and why they were distributed in the 16th century. More particularly, you need to know how and why they were granted in 1517. The belief at the time was that baptism would erase the penalties of original sin. Then, throughout life, Christians were expected to do what was within them in order to be saved. We learned what was meant to do what was within them in previous sessions. Practices such as confession, doing penance, going to Mass, and taking pilgrimages were spiritual exercises that would cleanse the soul. If someone died with sin, they were required to suffer punishment in purgatory until the sin was purged. In order to escape the wrath of suffering in purgatory, a person could purchase what was known as a plenary indulgence, which would wipe away all sin since baptism and allow a person to enter heaven and bypass purgatory. Martin Luther was not against the practice of distributing indulgences for a contribution of money, as long as the contributions were made for the sake of God. However, he was opposed to the way the church peddled indulgences in 1517. Unbeknownst to Martin Luther at the time, Pope Leo X had commissioned a preacher to sell indulgences in Germany. This was authorized for two purposes. One was to finance the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica, and the other was to repay a payment made to Pope Leo X to appoint an ambitious German named Albrecht as Bishop of Mainz. Albrecht was from a powerful family in Germany and had obtained a loan for his payment from a bank owned by another powerful family in Germany, the Frugers. Even though Martin Luther was unaware of the backroom politics behind the selling of indulgences in Germany, he had a problem with how they were dispensed. These indulgences could be obtained without the usual conditions, such as attending Mass or being sincere or doing penance. It was a cash-only transaction. Johann Tetzel was commissioned by Pope Leo X to sell these indulgences in Germany. He was at best an itinerant preacher. However, Johann Tetzel was very good at his craft. There would be publicity posted before his arrival in each town. His arrival was brought in with much pomp and circumstance. Armed guards accompanied Tetzel, and his entrance was preceded by a display of Pope Leo X's coat of arms, and a paper issued for the indulgence was posted on a makeshift cross. He would prey upon people's own fears and their concerns for relatives in purgatory. He would explain the ease with which one's relatives could be relieved from purgatory. Once the coin in the coffer clings, a soul from purgatory heavenward springs. Martin Luther became concerned with the irreverent ways these indulgences were sold. Not only was he concerned about how it would affect the souls of the faithful, but he was also concerned with how it would reflect on the Pope and the sanctity of his position.
Father, do you happen to have a hammer and nails that I could borrow?
What? Why do you need that? I happen to have one, though.
Awesome. Well, as you know, they're going to be selling indulgences in the square in Wittenberg again tomorrow.
Yeah, I heard that.
And it's just wrong You know, you can't buy God's love. God's favor is not for sale. All they need is to have faith. God already loves them, and they're going to convince them to spend their money on this worthless piece of paper, and it just makes me so angry.
Yeah, that's right. You've been teaching them from the Bible all along. We all know it.
Yeah, and they're sending Tetzel, that showman. Of course they'd send their best.
Yeah, he puts on a great show. All the fire and brimstone they could want. No one can resist him.
Right. So I've got some theses that I want to tack up on the door of the church, you know, against selling these indulgences.
Yeah, I could help you with that. I could probably come up with 10, 15.
Yeah? I've got 95.
Based upon Martin Luther's theological studies and teachings, he understood what the Bible said about the righteousness of God. And he understood that no amount of good works can earn salvation and God's grace. Knowing this, the practice of selling indulgences became even more distasteful. He had no choice but to take a stand on this practice and post his 95 theses on the Skolskirche Castle Church in Wittenberg. We have all heard or said the phrase, "Be careful what you wish for." Martin Luther had no idea his 95 theses would have the impact that it did. Originally, the 95 Theses were published in Latin for scholarly debate. However, because of changes brought about in the Renaissance, the technology of paper and the invention of the printing press made his theses much more available to the public. The 95 Theses were translated into German, and because of this new technology, it quickly spread among the people. They became widely read and accepted by the German people. They also had a very negative effect on the sale of indulgences. This upset some very powerful people in both Rome and Germany. Because the 95 Theses exploded on the scene and were so widely accepted by the German people, they created a catalyst for future political and religious change that neither Luther nor anyone else could ever have anticipated. While at the time it made Martin Luther a hero, it also eventually made him a criminal in the eyes of the church.
This time in Luther's life and in the history of the church really did bring forth an explosion of change. We now invite you to gather in your small group and discuss the dramatic shifts that were taking place during and after the posting of the 95 Theses. Consider the movement spurred by Luther's witness and the strength it must have taken to stand up against certain beliefs that had existed for centuries. May this conversation inspire you.